I was just taking notes, and so I want to appreciate Harish for the investment in his. I love the contribution he has made to think about rights-based and equality-based regime as being a modernist infrastructure that has been proposed, and I think that was a very intelligent point, and I think I need to consider that, thinking about these ways in those also that is being constructed, looking at the invariably inverse caste value. So I appreciate that invocation. As I said, the limits of this such an archive to compress in a chapter is itself very limiting as I understand. It needs a lot of treatment for a book like format maybe will take. The Herodian example, I think is very important because if we focus just on that two spheres, and I've been somebody who's advocating against looking at these two linear kind of spheres, India and the US and so forth, we have to problematize geographies and spaces. And so I do that, not in this, there's the next chapter, but also in my, not next, but next book, there's a lot of treatment in ideas of Ambedkar and thinking about Nico and Fanon and so forth. So I think I appreciate that and the many points that I might incorporate in the text. So I think we can go ahead and
Thank you, Dr. Ingde and Dr. Mangde, for such an insightful discussion. Now the floor is open for questions. We'll take 3 questions at a time. So, those who want to ask questions, please come to the stage.
Hello everybody. I have a series of questions to the speaker here. I will start with Ambedkar's quote. So he has written, comparison between the worst of one side and the best of the other for the present times are supposed to be golden age for untouchables. So he says the worst of one side, the untouchables, and the best of the other, the slaves, be it in the Roman or the American Negro slaves. So how is it compared? And then what is the exigency that makes it so eager to have an international solidarity, especially when we know the international academia is a Brahmin white nexus, and whether it exists de facto or is it just an academic ball game? And Dr. Ambedkar has clearly defined how a slave is different from an untouchable. And then in that sense, the ontologies of black existence and Dalit existence is different. So how will you arrive at an epistemology of such an international solidarity? And one last thing, also you mentioned about surplus labor. I guess we are all very mistaken if we see it from the Engels and Marxian conception of having a surplus labor for an untouchable, because that is something coming from a Western Eurocentric point of view. An untouchable was not just about surplus labor, as Ambedkar also mentioned, it's not just a division of labor but division of laborers. So there is something inherently local in the Indian discourse. So again I will repeat, what is the exigency to be global? Where is that frustration coming from?
Please keep your questions this time. Anyone else?
question is, gadget is just the side. What about the existing frameworks to deal with the Dalit standards? Present, like the Marxists, liberals, communitarians.
Any other question?
I am confident from CPA. So my question is related to the dilemma that the government face vis-a-vis the state house. So if I have understood correctly, so and if I situate your argument in the larger literature. So if you look at the literature, most of the scholars assume that the Dalit version discourse is too much enchanted with the state power, and in that process, they gloss over the cliff or dangerous side of the state. But you are trying to complicate that thing by bringing in the notion of state power that Dalit mentors have. So we have now two views. One, in terms of Dalit mentors, we try to resurrect against the idea of the state, and others of Kansiram, which is trying to capture the state power. So do we have any middle ground in between? And with respect to Dalit mentors, so why were they critical of the state? Was it due to the failure of the Indian state to deliver upon its promises, or was it coming from this Leninist or Marxist idea that state power itself is problematic and oppressive, therefore it needs to be thrown out? And if we move ahead, and we know that we have a critique of state power, so what would be the constitutive elements of Dalit state power which is in sync with the Dalit Baujan state?
If there are any other questions, we'll take it after the speakers respond to these questions.
Thank you everybody for asking those good questions. I think the concern, actually the question that was raised, about how do we frame based on that, what is the need of education and looking at is there a middle ground? I think we use that. Oh, it's not coming.
Change the site.
Thank you. In case you missed, I was just summarizing the questions. And I think they are valid questions, and I think there's no linear answer to that, because the problem that people face have to do with extreme isolation. Caste has done an effective system of isolations on multiple levels. And that isolation really creates what the part was saying, a deep psychological pressure upon the people who are oppressed. And for them to liberate out of that capitalist institution that puts them down, doesn't acknowledge their humanity, they have to find resources and avenues where they can feel much more belonged, they can grow, and they can really create a world where people like them are existing. I think that's the purpose of when we try to establish solidarity. It's not a commerce, like I say, it's a commerce of a certain factoid of materialism only, but it is about finding resonance with your own claims. So what he was asking about, referring to the slaves, and Dr. Baker was talking about, I mean, that's a very powerful quote. It's not the golden times. Here again, Dr. Baker is delving into the archive of black people, not because he is simply interested, but also he's reacting to many of the notions. He wrote that piece, particularly to think about to oppose Lala Lajpat Rai, but doesn't mean he's not drawing upon it. Harish was referring to the Du Bois Ambedkar connection of it. There's been overly written about, there's much more things to talk about, but he's beginning to see where certain frameworks are developed. They are not developed in certain kind of limbo. The frameworks are developed when certain resolutions have been committed, which is that there is a system of oppression. We need to overcome that, and we need to fight. So if you see resources have been shared and activated. You're right, the feminists establish their own epistemological reality, where the whole, not least in the war, but receiving that as well, we find in politics of sexuality, which really has much more resonances with the politics of Dalit and identity, also is now a canonical example. But it is not stigmatized to the level of how an untouchable body itself is a fluid of pollution. That itself creates an entire being of Dalit as a corporeality, a sin. And that propaganda of their inferiority is proposed through their childhood, through the many maxims, and stories, and mythologies and epics of these texts, and even institutions like this one. So how do we then create an autonomous, radical, independent freedom struggle for Dalit liberation? And that's how we look at elsewhere. And so the framework for Dalit studies here in your case is, I think it's an important point. I think one of the frameworks we should look at. I think we should look at all the available multidisciplinary avenues. I was just giving a talk yesterday in Mohali, and my point there was arguing about we need not just think about subjectivity of caste through a social science or humanities lens and just focus on human. We have to look at the other three dynamics that we operate in. Of course, one is the ecosphere. We have to look at how ecosphere is changing, how they're challenging. Second is the flora and fauna, where ideal protection becomes central. The list needs to be protected. Animals need to be protected. Trees need to be protected. Whole protection as a liberal dynamic then doesn't work in the state. And so your Pankaj's question about is there a middle ground, and I think that's a very important point, and even we are trying to explore and excavate the middle ground politics of where do we draw upon the extreme fear of the struggle. For example, the Panthers were again the critique that came with was about, especially the politics, was about they are merely adjusting into the caricature of the state. We have to look at how they are attacking the very foundations of the state without even having a resurrection of sorts. I mean, they are going through hitting right into the belly of the beast by looking at various programs and itineraries that uphold the modern, what we call construction of Hindu Rashtra or any Rashtra. Dalits have been trying to puncture this value line for very long. So what we see, a cultural nationalism that is taking place where an alternative state is proposed, Dalits, with the literary tradition, Panthers, have been already attacking that. And so that's much more powerful attack on any kind of caste radical formations than we can see elsewhere, where again the victims will be them and they set on their following limitations.
This is a two-cent like for that matter, our perspective will not be very different from or what we call the theory perspective, but will not be different from pluralist substantive democracy theory. That democracy requires pluralism and democracy should be substantive in nature. And probably that's some of the larger claim of the identity. That it should be a democratic aspiration and it should be like any other who has aspiration can participate in democratic discourse and claim for power. That claim is kind of summarized most of the discourses from it.
We'll take 3 more questions. Anyone?
Many things Dalit, but when it came to Marxist, ESP, Kashiram, you summed it up in one phrase, that is middle class. Only middle class can't make a CM. So why do you think there is nothing parallel to DSP in the black people's struggle?
Any other question?
Adhiraj, and I'm from the Center of English Studies. So my question is this: I wanted to circle back to this the idea of solidarity, especially this one-way solidarity, and how it has certain political uses. But I also wanted to ask you if this sort of solidarity should be universalized, because the bodies that are building the solidarities here are the ones that are sort of accruing certain political uses. So, and my question comes from this point of concern that, for instance, there are imagined ways of oppression as well. So, I mean, for instance, there are so many Brahmins who started considering themselves oppressed. So, if this episteme of solidarity is universalized, it's also accessible to those people. And then, it also becomes a route for them to, let's say, appropriate the experiences of the people that they have historically known.
Anyone else?
Hello sir, my name is Arun. I'm PhD student from CHS. Actually, you talk about like cultural sphere is a way of domination over society, and we talk about Brahminical dominance. And when we talk about Dalits, so you talk that it's a human claim. So in coming future, is it humanly possible to tackle these cultural domination? Because it should be like one way for all, no?
Thank you for the three questions. I think the gentleman's question there was about are there any parallels like BSP or Bounce in that era, in the black sphere? I mean, they've been always existing, especially the ones that have had it was not, it existed, it doesn't exist as a pan-US kind of, at least in my reading. There's been many pockets in several parts of the country, but it's so big a continent, but the idea of capturing the state is very prevalent. That's why the whole democratic practice is so rich in America. I mean, it's Democrats and Republicans, and there are also Greens and various other political dispensations. And I think that itself proves that there is a certain limit to how they looked at it. I mean, they experimented with Malcolm X himself, challenging the whole idea of America, talking about colonizing colonies within colonies, and to look at the subject as an island nation within America where black people need not adhere to. But yet, at the end of the day, the state as a power structure prevailed, and that's why we had Obama. That's why we have so many, the people of non-white backgrounds staking claim to the American Republican values. Today we see, if you look in America, there's many people. It's almost equivalent to drawing upon people from different categories have recognized that. And then so it is obvious that these examples exist, but as an organizational strategy of people contributing, I've not come across as such if there's any organization family, but I think it would be good to check. I was thinking about if there was equivalent to somebody like Kanchiram and elsewhere, and I think Kanchiram is probably the most singular, most unique model who proposes democracy in such a radical form that people would not still believe that democracy is possible in such ways, and other people would find alternative methods of taking up guns and violence and breaking down the state. Kanchiram reassures he's a practitioner of democracy in such a way the state just becomes his way. It doesn't become a finality. That's why the whole idea of capturing power, it's very essential. I'm writing on Kanchiram, and so this is what we have to look at. I mean, I'm looking at why such a democratic practice existed in the triumph of democracy in India is credited to Kanchiram. The other question about I think this is such an interesting question about how the epistemic relationality and the finding. I mean, anybody, the point is, if you read certain literature and you can feel how you have read to the experience, right? Yesterday, somebody questioned me, said, why do we need experiences why do experiences take prominence over everything else. And the position he was taking, I think, from a perspective where a person from a community or a person from a gender will not ascribe to certain things. The experience might not be there, but can they still feel? And I think this is a very critical question, right? I mean, it's almost a cancel culture question. I mean, you almost are, because in today's era, the agency is what is defined. And it will matter, at least for, I think, a couple of generations, where agency, until unless it is neutralized, at least on a level playing field, these questions are going to be cropped up. And so, positionality of victim is different than the person who is appearing as somebody who has an accidental of this act. A victim is somebody who is victimized for their position, for their viewpoints, for their location. And there are many accidents that you might accidentally be part of that, where you might not choose to be victim, but you have just because. But that's not an everyday experience. We are not going out to be victim every day. Nobody would like to be victim unless it pays you off well. In today's era, victim culture is again kind of a new coinage, a very neoliberal strategy to undermine the actual victimized bodies into something. So everybody fashionable claims some sort of hidden identity and just kind of targets one another as something poisonous. It could be a sexuality, it could be a language, it could be even your neurotic condition. I mean, these are the ways that people propose it and position. So your question, Anurag, is actually very valid, especially the politics of construction of self and political liberation. I mean, that connects to the gentleman's question right there as to the cultural dominance, right? I mean, what we notice is how dualities are constructed every day. The dualities are constructed around power and obsession to claim the politics of the power. These are the two vectors that operate through every state. Power might not be linear. Power might sometimes be coming from bottom up. I mean, you might have incidents of, example, a Modi election, right? I mean, the power is coming from the so-called bottom up, and then, it's not linear. But that's democratic practice, how it can function. But the politics to claim that power has become more sensational in today's times. That's why we can talk about cultural project, we can talk about global dominance, and looking at other examples. We need to understand what localized narratives mean for local conditions. And that's why when Dalit parents were writing in Marathi, or writing in Gujarati, or Tamil, were doing perfectly best what they could. And that should not be held against them for not articulating, because the aristocratic nature of the feudalism that operates here is extreme localization. But the genius of the Dalit Panthers here was to escape the localization of their bodies. They universalize their experience. That is what I was talking about. And I think this is where we need to articulate the theoretical practice of the Panthers. Is they remain local, I mean, by virtue of their feudal conditions, which was very much, which were not giving them the satraps of various states, where we're trying to dominate, because their fear was, what if they come for the actual demand that we are afraid of, and then they demand for something more. And then so somebody asked parallel examples of sort of Bouncing. So the civil rights era, Stokely Carmichael and the Black Power movement was about that. It was about enlisting people to become franchising. And then so you can count on voting and change the structure. So they did exist a broader movement where people left global American North, went into the South, which was much more slave era, and produced. So I think what remains dogmatic in understanding Indian politics has really reduced it to the identitarian crisis that does it. And I think people mistakenly heckle the Dalit notion as being an identity based epistemology, which it is not. I mean, it is one of the many, and so does it constitute. So I've been telling caste is something that is acting as a structure under which gender functions, under which various forms of oppression functions. We cannot just juxtapose caste with other experiences. Then it reduces the tenacity of caste and its octopus-like tentacles to hold on to various forms of oppressions. Yeah.
So it's a very small question. My name is Nitish and I am from CPS. So when we talk about the solidarities, one of the most interesting and fascinating debates which was started by Ambedkarite politics was about the unity of oppressed across all religions and the unity of Dalit, Bahujan, Pashmanda. But we all have seen when the matter for inclusion of Muslim Dalits and Christians came, whole debate of unity of oppressed got scattered and fragmented. So how do you see these new developments?
Any other question?
In this bigger problem of solidarity, I think there is also construction of the Dalit. And I was also thinking that what about the intra-Dalit contradictions here? The construct that really applies. They also somewhere repress or hardly highlights the internal contradictions which are very much obvious. Which are caste contradictions, the alignment of certain communities with the right wing, the Buddhist expressions now, the whole claim for middle class assets among certain Dalits. So there are multiple fragments within the discourse. And probably within the discourse, that diaspora of the possibility of a single mandate is very different. So within that, the unity is how to understand.
Anyone else?
Yes.
So, as an art historian I'm familiar with a body of work that has come out in different contexts where the word caste is used. So, say for example, when you make this distinction between slave and the Dalit experience, that the slave was a body that could be bought and sold, and so it was kind of a commodity transaction. We know, for instance, in the Spanish-speaking Americas, the way to produce cheap and inexpensive labor was rape. That the progeny of, and this is also something that we see in the Dalit experience as well, right? When we think in terms of how that unfolds. So, in Mexico, for instance, there is a class of paintings called casta paintings. And the casta paintings are precisely about the kind of labeling, skin types, epidermal difference, work, etc. represented just the way companies who make paintings in India also demarcated caste, in terms of the kind of typologies that they produce. So the word has a very broad resonance, I think.
This context, I think it's important to think about it because both structure of operations are different, black Dalit, and they are evoking their pain, sorrow, or the life work which they have gone through. It is based on the values which they are assigned, such as equality, dignity. So this value is actually value which is coming from the particular sense of universe, right? Which is this thing. But it's actually in converse, or it's actually in correspondence because of the solidarity. So the idea of solidarity is coming from the worldly concept such as equality, such as dignity, and therefore we can have many more parallels such as women or any similar spontaneous structure of operations. So I think this is one of the avenue to see them as a simultaneous spontaneous solidarity or group of solidarity. So this is something.
Yeah, give us. Yeah, so thank you, Suraj and Harish, for the fascinating discussion that is happening here. So I'm more interested in the fascinating things of literature. So not necessarily there is the writing or political writing, but you also have enormous literature. So is there a way to think about this whole
they are something that we treated instead of generating that percentage.
Any last pressing points? Yeah.
I'm also coming from a literature background. I have teaching in studies here. So I was wondering about the use of the word canon, like because within, so it has so many different, lineages, right? So what way in which, when you are linking ideation and canon, it would be great to hear more about how you do that.
Thank you. The question which you asked was about this internal solidarity. I think I should also picking up on that. And how do we create a subject before even launching the subject as a medium of solidarity? The subject itself is fraction. The subjecthood is not constructed completely. And then I think one of the ways to look at it is what William was pointing out was that the combative experiences and what it means. And certainly that should not discourage a statement of a common existence. So the fractures that exist painfully among the Dalits and so for various groups across these lines in America too. I mean, the contention was also about religion. I mean, there was an Islamic stand, there was a Christian stand, and there was people taking from different ideological orientation. And that still remained. I mean, but it didn't become the politics of disavowal of each other, or at least the cause. I mean, they were fragmentation, and so they did exist. And I think we have to take the fragmentation not necessarily as a lacuna in constructing solidarity, though it is on a local level certainly an institutional practice that one needs to overcome in the point of making solidarity. If we focus on our goals, the whole idea of religion was meant to be that where we assign the role of a political subject fighting against the Brahmin Banyata, where you become a common subject where you don't belong to either of categories and then you protest every category, you're a political subject who is unified. Certainly that doesn't resolve internal contradictions, and they're going to be existing. I don't think so. No matter what we do, those internal contradictions that we are habituated to practice as one's prestige and dignity won't be there. I mean, it's going to be existing because any caste will derive their aspiration through the relativity. And when it comes to redistribution and capturing of state resources, it becomes a war where certain groups notice is taking over resources or about that, and this is going to discipline the categorizations further. And I think this appears in redistribution politics, in accessing public goods, and reclaiming certain services that will belong to you. But how can then act exactly is a potentially conflicting position. And I'm not going to say look at other groups, they still have it, and so it's normal. That did not make defense. However, what we have existing as an internal contradiction that exists despite region, despite your subcategory, your region, is the profundity of India's caste system. It is not about only one category or the other category, which is going to form it. And so when we are creating a solidarity based on experiences, we're creating solidarity on future alliances. We're creating solidarity of what it means to stand for each other. I think these differences, though existing, might see a larger, bigger light where you can then capture whatever the issues that exist. And I think therefore, this position of how do you examine a canon? And I think with the literary dislocation that has often happened was over the canonical fights. What canon should be a poem, what canon should be, it's almost like a stream of its own caste. And when I mentioned Hindu canon, I wanted to incorporate the rabbinical and non-rabbinical sources that comes from it, that constitute it. And I think many a times there's a proposition of dharma being a secular concept, secular in the sense of the values that we propose of dharma, are now also existing among the practitioners of Islam, practitioners of Christianity, which is the idea of Varnashram dharma. So, the question is dharma then a secular concept? Because the quandary that is before us is, though theologically one might not ascribe to caste, hierarchy does exist in the religious formations of these groups. Birth-based hierarchies still do exist of this group. Redistribution of labor values do exist in various groups. But here, the finality of the condemnation of your birth to the death carries throughout, which is not possible. There is a certain class standards that come, and that's why class is a very potent rescue for the oppressed caste, because that's one of the avenues they see that they can exhibit their own independence because they don't see exiting from caste. So, class like avenues become their way of registering their presence. And so the Hindu canon here can consist of what one can call a political nature of a harmonic tradition we have in India. And it belongs to many traditions. It has been. My dispatch to that canon is to say that the anti-rabbinical sphere incorporates a larger canon. It is a public canon. It is a canon located in counter as well as pro-publics. It is not confined to one kind of a location of one town. And so, this poetic solidarity, I think it's great, and I think you can see poets gesturing to each other. But what I was saying is one-sided is because it was not necessarily received by the other side. I mean, but that's the beauty of solidarity also. You know, I'm thinking about it. Can solidarity be a commerce? I mean, I've been thinking deeply. I wrote one paper about this, and I was thinking, I kind of wrote sibling solidarity. There's solidarity, but you don't say sibling every day I love you, or you don't say I care for it. I mean, there is a given solidarity. It's a commonality, there's a lineage, there's experience. And so I think the notional deference here could be then applied to the sibling solidarity where you find a common lineage, though not experiences, caste and race are different, how they function, the color paradigm changes, it keeps on shifting. So I think we need to then look at, the Rajna himself, as I said, would translate. But the point is, we could not read. We have, the people are giving one letter, I mean, the Black Panthers have written, not letter, but a publication where they acknowledge that they work in leadership and all. But the point is, why should we rely on their archives for reciprocation? What you do is what is within your ambit. And that's happened everywhere else. I mean, in the Philippines, in Israel, and so forth. We have had this. And so the question still remains, if I say, I care about you, and the other person doesn't respond to me, does that make my moral project of ethical solidarity any difference than when another person says, I got you? And that's the political nature, and something I will do in coming years.
Apologies for coming between you and your child.